Stanford University.
Before I get going, I did want to point out a mini-series that's coming up. The only credit I can take for this is coming up with its name. Is that right, Sally?
No, you're the idea.
Oh, okay. Going underground, we call it. All the things that are going on in this university about going underground with respect to energy. Geothermal, carbon capture and sequestration, nuclear waste, shale gas. There's a lot of interesting things when you dig deep into the earth related to energy, and that's what this series is about. So we encourage your attendance. So I want to give you a 50,000-foot view of where I see energy going, working across my favorite triangle of technology, policy, and finance. And I'll get to that in a minute, but take you through a series of slides and take your questions. If there ever was a moment, I think this captures it. The future is not what it used to be. And I've never, in my 25 or 30 years in the energy world, seen a moment like today when it comes to the challenges of energy, and some would argue the opportunities, although each day I'm a little bit dimmer about the opportunities. So from the Gulf oil spill to the Fukushima reactors, this great projections, a wonderful change in events about the projections for natural gas in this country. At the same time, problems in the solar industry that have only been magnified in the last couple of weeks with some new things that have happened. I've loved this quote: the best way to predict the future is in fact to invent it. And that's actually what's so exciting about this moment at the same time. We can invent it in so many different ways, and I think that's what's exciting for me to be here at Stanford, getting to work on these energy issues in a very interdisciplinary way across a great university that sits inside this amazing valley. So I'm thrilled to be here, thrilled to be talking to all of you, and as much as I think this is a challenging moment, I also think that it's a moment of great opportunity. It's also extraordinary in terms of the numbers. I've always had troubles with billions and trillions, but when you start to talk about tens of trillions, this is the IEA estimates of what we're going to be investing over the next couple of decades. $26 trillion. They argue it's the biggest economic opportunity of the 21st century. Even if it's second or third, it's an extraordinary opportunity in terms of the investments that will be made, and either we'll get them right or we won't. And I think that's the wonderful challenge here. And this is my favorite triangle: technology, policy, and finance. If you want to think about a more sustainable energy future, we've got to do it in an integrated fashion. Too often, I think each of us works at one corner of that triangle without paying much attention to the other two. At best, we might work at two. But we've got to both drill deep in our particular disciplines, but also better understand what's really driving the larger progress or lack of progress towards a more sustainable energy future. And in the class that I'm co-teaching now, a joint business school, law school class, I put this slide up every session. And I say to the students, here it goes again. But I really want them to think about, particularly where policy and finance drive or don't drive successfully, the move of advanced technologies into the marketplace. The strategies are pretty obvious in terms of both stationary and transportation. Different things that we can do, moving those 3 points of the triangle forward. And the opportunities, I think, are vast across those 6 strategies. I always start here. I think you have to start here. As Amory Lovins likes to say, all people want is cold beer and hot showers. We're interested in the services that energy provides. And if we can do it with a lot less, and if we can do it with a lot less, a lot more cheaply, that's where we ought to begin. And that's in fact the great beauty of energy efficiency. It's this boring, cheap stuff on the left side of the famous McKinsey curve. Insulation. It doesn't get more boring than that, but it's the really low cost, zero cost, negative cost opportunities. Lighting systems, air conditioning, water heating. Most of the time, at least in the broader policy arena, in the press, we're up there at the expensive stuff. And this, I think, to our great detriment, down on the lower left, gets ignored, I should say, to too great an extent. The lowly refrigerator is perhaps the best example. Where were we in 1972? Using almost 2,000 kilowatt hours a year, the average refrigerator sitting in your kitchen. Government work, a series of prizes, private sector research, a whole host of things. As of 2000, the 2001 standard couldn't use more than 450 kilowatt hours a year. Meanwhile, the refrigerators got much bigger and they got a lot cheaper. This was also my greatest day as a bureaucrat. My office oversaw the issuance of this standard, the new refrigerator standard. It came out not too long after President Clinton gave his inaugural address, the theme of which was building a bridge to the 21st century. And the Energy Secretary at the time, Bill Richardson, said to me, "Hey, Reicher, what should I get up and say?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Secretary, why don't you announce we're building a fridge to the 21st century?" It was the quote of the week in Newsweek, you know, that box quote. It was my greatest day. Not too long after that, we were announcing new standards for washing machines. And he says, this is Governor Richardson, former Governor Richardson. He goes, "Reicher, what should I say now?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Secretary, why don't you announce we're agitating for change?" I've spent years, as some of you know, in the penitentiary. I'll leave you alone at that. All right, let's keep going. So, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. I think this really gets us to a very fundamental point in the current energy situation, particularly sitting here in Silicon Valley. ET meets IT. The extraordinary intersection between these two worlds of energy technology and information technology. How many of these things do people know? Not many, not much of this information is the sort of information that we get very easily in our homes or our businesses. Imagine if we didn't have prices in the grocery store. Imagine if nothing was labeled. Imagine if we didn't have an accounting of what we spend on food. But that's basically the way most of us in our homes and businesses operate those, without any real prices, without any real understanding. At Google, we developed something called Google Powermeter. Our theme was knowledge is less power. And it gave you pretty much real-time information sitting on a meter on the kitchen counter. And it was an extraordinary day as I watched my 7-year-old put a slice of bread in the toaster and he yells, "Hey, Daddy, look at how the meter jumped up." You know, it went from 400 to 1,500. And it was a real learning moment for him. He started to go around turning things on and off all over the house, watching what it did to the meter. That's learning. That's understanding. Google has not gone forward with this for various reasons. But we learned a lot from it. Those kinds of comments were very, very informative. The good news is that a healthy race has developed. A whole host of companies that I've listed here and many more have gotten into this race to give people real information about their energy use in near real or real time. One of those, among many, is C3. Delivers a new generation of enterprise software solutions that enable organizations to maximize profitability and cash flow by optimizing their energy and resource strategy. These guys are getting very good at helping companies get a better sense of what they're using, and based on that, really improving their approach to energy management. So this is, I think, a very positive aspect of where we sit today, particularly in this valley, and what we're able to do with energy management. So that's on the demand side. On the supply side, lots and lots and lots of focus on photovoltaics and other renewable sources. But you'll see down here, Chinese pulverized coal and US efficiency. It just gives you a sense why I'm stressing the efficiency part of the equation. But the basic situation with renewables today is that they still have some distance to go to compete straight up with traditional forms of energy. I don't think that's news to anybody sitting in this room. The debate is how far they have to go. Real lack of agreement about what the levelized cost of electricity is with respect to these various sources. And going forward, how much to count into these equations, the subsidies at federal and state levels, and a whole host of other things that make up these projections that so much of energy, of our energy situation is based on. I have a sort of a bookend when it comes to this. This was my house in Chevy Chase, Maryland, when I was Assistant Secretary of Energy 15 years ago. Ed Beardsworth is in the room, and he said, "Dan, you're not going to show that slide of your house, are you?" And I said, "I haven't showed it in years, but I'm showing it for a reason today. I think this is a real bookend." This was the first legally grid-connected photovoltaic-powered home in the DC area. All the other ones had sort of, in the dark of night, had hooked themselves up to the grid. We did it legally. We were net metering. It was working for a while, but it was extraordinarily expensive. And then one day we had a terrible snowstorm in DC, and the entire system collapsed. Just all the supports gave way, and that was the end of my photovoltaic system after about 9 months. So that was kind of my introduction to the world of photovoltaics. We've made a lot of progress, a lot of progress. The cost curves have come down dramatically. We're now taking this industry seriously in a way that we didn't, frankly, back then. A healthy race has developed internationally. But it's also brought out a lot of political controversy, a lot of attention to an issue like Solyndra. On the transition team, we made a suggestion that was ultimately incorporated into the stimulus package to fund an existing loan guarantee program that had been put on the books by Congress in 2005. That went forward. 40 stimulus projects have been funded for involving energy technologies. Solyndra was one of those, just one of those. It has gotten itself into trouble. I think the jury is still out on where we will end up with that story. But the knives are out. A major congressional investigation is underway. The Wall Street Journal has been really pressing hard on this. But I think, we do have winners and losers in government. Again, I don't know where the Solyndra investigation will lead. I don't know where some of the other inquiries into this loan guarantee program will lead. But I do think we've got to look at this as a package of investments that have been made to advance a series of immature technologies. And I think good things may come from a number of the projects in that broader loan guarantee portfolio. And some perspective. There's Solyndra. This is a little hard to read, but this is the ballistic missile defense system. This is future combat systems. There's a whole host of things where we spent tens, hundreds of billions of dollars. Some have worked, some haven't, and so I think a bit of perspective is necessary when it comes to government programs. Meanwhile in China, really gearing up in terms of manufacturing. I think we know this well, and I think that's led us to this situation that we face with respect to increasingly low-cost panels available on the market, but at the same time, increasingly drawing high-tech R&D. An awful lot more R&D being developed. China is no longer simply the home of low-cost manufacturing, but increasingly the home of advanced R&D. And then, to know that we're really growing up, we get into a major trade dispute. This was filed, as some of you know, last week, a 3,000-page petition filed before the Department of Commerce and the International Trade Commission. We only know one of the 6 petitioners. The others are blanked out. I read through this last night. Most of the document is blanked out. Most of it involves proprietary data. We'll see where this all comes out. The solar industry itself is very split on this. In fact, the main solar trade association, the Solar Energy Industries Association, is not taking a position on this petition. So like so many trade disputes, this is extraordinarily complicated, We'll see where it all leads. Having said all this, I remain hopeful, and there's some things afoot, that we can find some cooperative ways to work with the Chinese to advance our global needs and opportunities in clean energy. I think there's all sorts of ways to do that. And I'm hopeful that we will not simply devolve into a trade dispute like this. So I got to China really early. A month after they opened the country up to what they call backpackers, a friend of mine and I said, well, we can find a kayak that folds up and put it in a backpack, and we got on a plane and we flew to China and we went kayaking. There's only one reason I put this slide up, and that's the guy in the front seat. This is for you students. It shows you how far you can get. He's now the new U.S. Senator from Ohio who sits on the Senate Energy Committee. One of my closest friends in the world, Rob Portman. And it's great fun to have one of your best friends in the world, the best man at your wedding, send you funny little notes when you're testifying before him with your nickname on it. It's like nothing I've ever experienced. And I won't show you any of these notes either. Anyway, going on in the renewable energy sphere, something else we focused on at Google, and this is indeed going underground, is the whole world of enhanced geothermal systems. Traditional geothermal, you drill down, you find a pocket of steam or hot water, you exploit that, and when that runs dry, that's it. Enhanced geothermal system, you go down, you fracture the rock, and you can bring up vast, vast quantities of heat. But there are lots of challenges in this technology. It's got big, big opportunities surrounding it, but lots of challenges. The opportunities are the size of the resource is absolutely vast. You know, a state like Texas capturing just 2% of the enhanced geothermal resource there at 177,000 megawatts, you know, of a million or so megawatts represented by the entire US generating system. That's a lot of potential energy. But as I say, we've got a long distance to go with this technology. But if several of the venture-backed companies that we invested in when I was at Google do in fact succeed, this could be a great baseload resource, great complement to intermittent sources like solar and wind. Wind, I think everyone in this room knows a lot about wind. I'd like to focus though on the offshore resource, particularly on the US East Coast. It is a vast resource. Rated outstanding in red, close to tens of millions of people. And it's highly attractive, assuming we can continue to come down the cost curve. DOE's looking at 50,000 plus megawatts in the mid-Atlantic region and slightly north and south of there by 2030. Again, a big resource. But a challenge is how you get this to market. And there's really two routes. One is a series of radial ties from the high wind areas that you'll see in those blue patches. Low voltage radial ties that go into the low voltage part of the transmission system. Not contributing to what the East Coast really needs, which is a more enhanced overall electric grid. Not coming in at the higher voltage levels, not strengthening the grid, not improving efficiency. One of the projects we launched at Google, and I've stayed involved with since coming to Stanford as an advisor, is called the Atlantic Wind Connection. Series of companies, Google and 3 others, invested in it and would build a transmission line from the New York-New Jersey border, a high voltage DC line, down to the Virginia-North Carolina border, which would allow these offshore wind projects to be hooked up at high voltage, and from there to hook up at some high voltage points along the East Coast grid, allowing for a great improvement in reliability, efficiency, supporting the grid in a way that this grid isn't today. And it's a very exciting project, at the same time a very expensive project, so it remains to be seen where it goes, but so far so good in terms of its early development. Obviously, key to all of this are these great forecasts that we're now seeing for natural gas. I remember the 80s and 90s when it looked like we were running out of gas in the US. But you look what the projections are now and look at it globally. US going from conventional gas reserves at 7.7 to almost 25. China, conventional at 3, 36. These are TCF. The Canadian resource. This is extraordinary finds as a result of technology development. Shale gas figures very prominently in these vastly expanded resources. And so with this, we've had some big things happen. What's produced a lot of this were some policy changes made way back in the late 70s. The Natural Gas Policy Act of 1978 gradually took off the controls on gas prices, and among the many effects was to expand exploration and development of new technologies, including, most importantly, most relevantly, the unconventional resources. The conventional, you drill down into a pocket of natural gas. There are many unconventional, but the shale gas, you drill down, you then drill horizontally, fracture the shale with fracking fluids are pumped into the well at high pressures. You create cracks in the rock. That allows the escape of gas, and you're pulling up large quantities of natural gas. A vast new source of natural gas as a result of this hydraulic fracturing process. And vast new areas of the country being opened up, from areas in the Northeast to areas in the Southeast and along the Gulf. The big plays, the Marcellus, the Barnett, and the Haynesville. Some big rates of return that people are looking at with the development of these. This is what's attracting massive amounts of development capital right now in a way we haven't seen before, particularly in areas of the country where we haven't seen this kind of development before, particularly in the Northeast. But a whole range of environmental impacts and the jury is very much still out on these impacts, from groundwater contamination to wastewater disposal to induced seismicity. And every day there's a new story. It remains to be seen how well the connections are made between fracking and these various problems. But so far, I think we simply don't have the data to prove it one way or the other, and I think it will slow the development of this resource, and it's hard to predict where we'll be in 5 years in this country. EPA would have regulated this technology but for an exemption in the Energy Policy Act of 2005. So EPA at this point does not have that authority. There's something called the FRAC bill, which stands for, I love this, the Fracking Responsibility and Awareness of Chemicals Act, the FRAC bill, that would give EPA back its authority. The Department of the Interior does have authority to regulate fracking on federal lands, but it hasn't set any rules yet. Those are due out later this year. And then the Department of Energy has no regulatory authority, but has been really looking deeply into this whole issue lately. At the state level, things are beginning. One of the big issues are the fracking fluids themselves, which can contain many, many, many different kinds of chemicals. A couple of states, Pennsylvania and Wyoming, have said, we want to know what's in those fracking fluids. So those laws are now on the books, and others are being considered as we speak. New York temporarily banned fracking. We'll see where New York ends up. The Marcellus, a big chunk of that resource is in upstate New York. And then New Jersey adopted a ban, but Governor Christie vetoed the bill, and we'll see where that ends up. And then this whole issue highlighted just a couple of days ago of whether, in fact, this fracking leads to seismicity. And the jury on that is still very much out. So no doubt there's a vast, vast natural gas resource, the likes of which we weren't thinking about, 15, 20, 25 years ago. The question is whether we can develop it in a way that will be publicly acceptable and leave us in a place where the environment is adequately protected. I think that's very much to be seen. Nuclear. We could spend an entire session on nuclear. We could spend an entire course on nuclear. I think it's interesting that John Rowe, the CEO of Exelon, the third largest utility in the country, said this a day or two ago in the Wall Street Journal. It's an interesting view. His view is that the capital isn't going to be there to build the next generation of nuclear power plants, largely because the federal side of that formula, for example, loan guarantees, are unlikely to be available. A loan guarantee or two have already been made as a result of the 40 or so that came out of the stimulus package for a new reactor in Virginia. But it's unlikely that whole package of stimulus-related funding, if that'll be extended in any way. So he asks a very interesting question. Will there be public financial support from this? Set aside where the public comes out one way or the other on a new generation of nuclear reactors. I think the basic issue will be financing from the public side. I think this is the one thing that people do focus on. The price of gasoline, what they pay at the pump. As my dear friend Ed knows, this slide really caught my attention because, believe it or not, I delivered our third child in the front seat of a car on a cold day in Vermont at a Shell station. I kid you not, he's got two nicknames. One is Car's son. The other is Shelley. I like this one even better. We provide on-site home refinancing to help out with gas purchase. Anyway, this is how we do engage the public. This is probably the one and only way we engage the public when it comes to energy issues, is what they pay at the pump. And I think the good news is, like to say, the dog finally caught the car. I can't tell you how excited it is to see Chevy building this legitimate, serious plug-in vehicle. For 20, 30, 40 years, we've had little attempts here and there to do it, but here a mainstream American manufacturer has stepped up and getting good reviews, selling well, along with the Japanese manufacturers, along with manufacturers here in Silicon Valley. I think this is a day we've longed hoped for, so I feel like we have turned a corner when it comes to plug-in vehicles. Lots of infrastructure still needs to be developed. A lot of things need to happen to make this mainstream, but I think we've definitely turned a corner. One of the exciting things is, again, ET meets IT. We can do an awful lot if we got to 2 million, 3 million, 4 million plug-in cars in California. The ability to control their charging, the ability to do good things for the grid. At Google, we did a smart charging demo, which showed how you could use a few million plug-in vehicles to help better integrate wind and solar into the grid on a large scale. When the wind isn't blowing, when the sun isn't shining, you can get electricity from people who have signed up for a plan that would allow you to take a quarter of the electricity from their battery, for example. There's a whole host of things that information technology would allow you to do to better manage the grid, at the same time to allow a much greater penetration of intermittent sources like solar and wind into that grid. And that would take us to the full piece, from renewable sources to advanced transmission and distribution, a smart home, a plug-in vehicle. A lot of this could come together, again, facilitated by information technology. I think that's a very exciting day to look forward to. But Edison would recognize much of today's electric grid. In fact, there are still power plants operating that he had something to do with building. lo, those many decades ago. So we've got a long, long way to go. And the question is, how quickly can we get to that point where that smart grid is in fact a reality? And that takes us back to technology, finance, and policy. I've touched on some policy instruments as I've walked you through this. You know, there's R&D funding, there's a carbon price, cap and trade, a clean energy standard, loan guarantees, tax credits, feed-in tariffs, whole host of policy tools that can really drive these things forward. The problem today, I think, is we've got a Congress, we've got an administration where I don't think a lot of this is likely to happen in the next couple of years. So I think we've advanced the thinking on a whole host of policy tools. A lot of things are sitting there in terms of proposed legislation. Some have been marked up by the relevant committees. Some have enjoyed bipartisan support in one or the other house. But I think we've got a long way to go in terms of actually seeing them adopted. And finance. You know, how are we going to bring that massive amount of capital, which, as I said, is measured literally in the trillions of dollars, to the building and rebuilding of our energy system in this country and around the world? What's it going to take? Let me mention one particularly important area that I think may be relevant to a number of you in this room, and then I'll wrap up. Sitting between the world of venture capital and even before the world of venture capital, government R&D in the energy area, sitting between that and the world of traditional project finance, how do you get a well-proven technology financed up and running? Sitting between that is this area of commercialization of an energy technology. Essentially, how do you move from something proven at pilot scale with venture money, with some government money, to something that operates at full commercial scale and operates well enough that traditional sources of finance, project finance, equity and debt, will start to invest? This is the so-called valley of death that sits between a pilot scale energy project and a fully commercialized plant. It was interesting being at Google, where software engineers sit down one day, 3 or 4 or 5 of them, they decide to develop a project, they write code, and I'm simplifying because I am certainly not a software engineer, but deployment day arrives and they press a button and 6 months later they have 5 million users. And I said one day to a couple of them, you know, let me tell you about the world of energy technology. Photovoltaics, I don't know, we started to push them 50, 60 years ago. You know, we're not even at 1/8% of US electricity, to say nothing of global electricity. There's just a very different time dimension between the commercialization of energy technology and the commercialization of the software that underlies information technology. So this valley of death looms very, very large. And I got to experience it in a private equity firm that we started before I got to Google. And we would regularly see corn ethanol plants come in the door seeking financing. It was always straightforward for us, and we financed 4 of them, to put our money into those corn ethanol plants. Our money coming from pension funds and other investment houses. Well understood technology. We knew if we built a 25 million gallon plant, plus or minus a couple of percent, we'd know what kind of ethanol would come out the other end. But every few months, we get a proposal to build a cellulosic ethanol plant. But none had been built at commercial scale. And given the capital that had been given us to invest, some of which was capital invested by pension funds, that was too high a risk. So for years, commercial scale cellulosic ethanol plants pretty much didn't get built to prove them at scale. It took largely the loan guarantee program to get the first couple underway. So that's an example that I experienced of this valley of death. And as I say, it looms very large. It's a big problem that the venture capital world, the clean tech world in here in Silicon Valley is facing. where their companies can get things to pilot scale, but getting into full commercialization is a real problem. Let me show you the expert on this.
A lot of these small startups, they can get angel investors. They can get several $1 million to get a company going. But it's very hard for them to then scale up, particularly if these are new cutting-edge technologies. It's hard for them to find private investors. And part of what's happening is China and Europe, other countries, are putting enormous subsidies into these companies and giving them incentives to move offshore.
So that's our dear president talking about the Valley of Death. It was great to hear him talk about it. So the policy response. This is a very serious proposal. It enjoys bipartisan support. Got out of the Senate Energy Committee. It would create something called the Clean Energy Deployment Administration, or CEDA. As I say, focus on the Valley of Death, scale up of breakthrough technologies from pilot demos to first commercial plants. Technology neutral, from fossil to renewables to efficiency to nuclear across the entire technology spectrum. It would build on the DOE loan guarantee program, but provide a much broader array of tools. Instead of simply a loan guarantee, that was the one and only tool you get in the loan guarantee program. There are loans, there's letters of credits, bonds, profit participation, insurance products. There'd be a whole host of things that this new entity could provide to get through this Valley of Death, get through this commercialization problem. It would have some independence from DOE and OMB, which has made DOE's challenges even harder in many respects, and would be a great complement to the pending clean energy standard. It could also take a profit stake, an equity stake in the company that it puts money into, like the Export-Import Bank, and therefore maybe not have to go back to Congress after its initial capitalization. So I and a number of others have spent the last couple of years really pressing this hard. I was hopeful for a while. I think given the friction and partisanship in Congress right now, I'm not sure if much, if anything, in terms of energy legislation is going to happen, but I think this one is pretty high on the list. And both Senator Bingaman, the chairman of the Senate Energy Committee, and Senator Murkowski, the ranking Republican, Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, both strong proponents of this. So if something goes, I think this has got a shot. Finishing up, the Steyer-Taylor Center. We kicked it off this winter, funded by Tom Steyer and Kat Taylor, launched in January. And we are indeed focusing on policy and finance. The focus is broad, again, technologically. And a couple of near-term projects is, in fact, this Valley of Death problem. We are exploring some private sector answers to this, given that the lack of likelihood of getting this adopted in Congress. And so we're looking at the potential to incubate a new business around this. Looking at this whole question of China and its role in clean energy technology development, particularly the flows of capital in China to clean energy, beginning to launch a project that will look at that. And then a host of laws and policies. One that's particularly interesting right now, one of the few bright spots in Washington, D.C., is the role of the Department of Defense in clean energy. A wonderful race has broken out between the military services to see who can be the greenest. And they're really seeing the benefit of clean energy. They're really seeing the benefit of improving the electricity grid in this country from a security standpoint. Really seeing the benefit of reducing what has to be hauled to the front lines in a battle in terms of fuels. So Secretary of the Navy was here a few weeks ago. The Secretary of the Army will be here next month. A lot of interest in what's going on in Silicon Valley from an energy perspective. So it's something that the center is also involved with. And lastly, a new course that we're teaching co-teaching with Stefan Reichelstein at the business school called Clean Tech Business Fundamentals and Public Policy. It's been very exciting. We've got 85 very smart business law and engineering students in this class, and it's really it's been quite fun to be able to get up and talk to them about this exciting area. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions.
Okay, questions? Okay, maybe, how about right here? Yep, yes.
I have a couple questions about the renewable portfolio standard. Is it popular on its own, in Washington? And would a high enough one draw more finance into renewables and into risk-free ones? It seems like in California, the utilities are looking at solar thermal that's somewhere in the valley because the RPS is so high, they've got to do something. So is that alone a way to get some leverage?
The question is the renewable portfolio standard. Do you mean the California renewable portfolio standard?
Well, does it have any traction nationally?
Well, so a couple things. There's roughly 30 states that now have some version of a renewable portfolio standard. Or a clean energy standard. They vary greatly. In Washington, there has been, and I referenced it briefly, something called the Clean Energy Standard, which has been bumping around. And that would include renewables. It would probably include advanced fossil technologies, nuclear. The president has talked about getting to 80 or 85% clean energy by 2035. So there's been various formulations of this. The state renewable energy standards, renewable portfolio standards, have driven a fair amount of action, depending upon the state. And in a place like California, which increased its from 20% to 35%, it is in fact driving utility investment. Would I like to see a national one put together? Absolutely. The likelihood of that, not very high at this point.
So actually, let's go back to that. The state and sort of regional government levels. Often it seems it's easier to get progress at those levels than at the federal level. Can you sort of talk about things that have worked there that you think might work?
So the question is state and regional progress versus federal progress. I think that's a true statement, at least of late. And regional approaches have really taken root. We've seen, the Northeast, for example, where energy costs tend to be high with winter heating and summer cooling. Policy around energy efficiency has been a big push. So you've seen a whole variety of programs, similar sorts of things here in California. You've seen areas of the country, Iowa and those areas where wind is a major opportunity, a whole host of things that have gone into policy there to push those kinds of energy sources. So we have seen regional approaches to this. We have seen policy that reflects the regional resource base. One of the trickier aspects of this, though, is in fact transmission, which often these days has to move long distances. How do you move wind from the Midwest to the Northeast? And there you get into all sorts of problems, having to cut across multiple states through multiple regions, very different political jurisdictions, different people running the grid in different parts of the country. So it works to some extent, but there are lots of things that do require national solutions, and I think the frustrating part of this for me is how much, to a large extent, Washington is not part of the equation these days. Yeah.
Do you have any comments on the NIMBY element in all this? And that seems one of the real difficulties in getting this stuff through.
The NIMBY elements.
Yeah.
The not in my backyard problem. Yeah, well, it looms large, across most of the energy spectrum. I've been spending a lot of time over the last few years on offshore wind, and the Cape Wind project, which would have built or may still build the first U.S. offshore wind project off of Cape Cod. That's stuck right in the middle of NIMBY, right between M and B. It's a real problem, you know. And one of the interesting things about this transmission line, this offshore transmission line that I told you about, is that it would actually allow turbines to be set further offshore, 15, 20, 25, 30 miles, where they disappear, you know, off the horizon. And so that's a real advantage. So people are stepping up to this. Now, having said that, one of the great responses to NIMBY, of course, is energy efficiency. That doesn't have too many NIMBY problems. You know, it's there for the taking. Yeah.
Thanks for your talk. Regarding mechanisms to address the value of death problem, you mentioned CETA in terms of potentially mobilizing public capital. I wonder if you could address what you see as some attractive mechanisms that your center is working on that would tackle mobilizing private capital in this sector to invest in some of these technologies.
Well, let me be clear. CETA is intended, first and foremost, to mobilize private capital in the sense that it basically says to private investors, by various means, we're going to help you reduce the risk of an investment in an initial commercial scale-up plant. We're not going to do it on the 15th plant, or maybe not even the 5th, but the mechanisms are there for the first and second so that you can get comfortable about investing in projects 3 through 100. That's the essence of it. And instead of simply doing this based on the loan guarantee tool, it would have a whole host of other tools that it would use to incentivize private investment. Now, having said that, we are looking at purely private mechanisms. And there are some things, I don't want to go into details right now, but there are some things that could, in fact, put in place as a private sector mechanism, incentivize additional private sector capital to come in. And that's, you know, increasingly, I think, where we're going to have to go if public policy mechanisms like CETA aren't going to happen, if the loan guarantee program isn't going to be refunded. So stay tuned on that. Yes?
Yeah, now maybe get the student back.
Good.
You mentioned some of the companies that are really beneficial because they're showing households how much energy they're using and how that's changing behaviors. Well, of course, a lot of these cheap energy sources are cheap because there's no way to show the external costs that they're creating. Is there something in the offing where there's somebody out there who's going to be able to show folks, if they're using like coal, how much external costs that are involved that they're not
It's a great question. In addition to knowing your kilowatt hours, could you know your carbon consumption at a moment? And the answer is yes. There are carbon calculators that can go online and do that. You know.
What I'm saying is, okay, yeah, you can see the carbon calculator, but like for instance, back in 2009, there was some economists who actually put a dollar amount on those carbon costs. Is there somebody who's not only showing the carbon production, but the cost of that carbon production on the external costs?
The broader externalities.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you can always expand this data to do more things. I don't think the average person sitting at their kitchen counter can do a lot with that, but you certainly could give them mechanisms to dig deeper and deeper into the data and find that. And there's all sorts of analytical tools that can do that in increasingly real-time mechanisms. But to get very simple about it, I just think the upfront energy efficiency is just so compelling. One of my favorite lines is low-hanging fruit grows back. You think about the incandescent bulb being replaced with the compact fluorescent bulb being replaced with the LED. We don't use up this energy efficiency opportunity. Technologically, we're always making improvements. So just getting that in front of people, this 2 and 3 cent a kilowatt hour power is just an extraordinary opportunity. And that's why I don't walk around too depressed about the state of energy because I know if we got serious, that was always sitting there as a real resource. Yes?
During your time in Washington, did you notice any differences in public attitude, like among the US or Europe or Asia, that influenced what the energy policy was?
During my time in Washington, did I notice?
Is in public opinion that influenced the energy policy, among different areas?
International conventions about
Oh, differences from nation to nation. Oh, absolutely. Yes, I mean, what? Yeah, where do I begin? The comparisons are so many and so deep. I mean, you look at the commitments of different countries to energy efficiency, to moving ahead in a more aggressive way with renewable energy, to the prospects for a smarter grid, and just often the less partisan nature of their politics there around these energy opportunities and the progress that they're making. And I think many countries in the EU are good examples of that. But I think it's going to be very interesting to watch China on this front. Vast amounts of capital, vast ability to manufacture lower cost goods, a rapidly increasing R&D capability in energy, the likes of which we didn't realize even 2 or 3 years ago. So I think that's the big question mark on the horizon. Yes.
Same question around fracking. As you go around the world, are they doing more of it than we are? Are they regulating it more than we are? What do you see going on in other parts of the world?
I don't know a lot about fracking in the rest of the world. The Australians have found a big resource and are moving forward. I think the regulatory regime varies. I think the big issue, for example, in England, has been seismicity. Not only what I put up there a couple of days ago, but there have been earlier earthquakes, and it's not an earthquake-prone area. So I think there's question marks there. I think the disposal of these fracking fluids, which is likely to be the biggest issue here, there's just massive amounts of fracking fluids that go along with this. Different approaches being taken to that in different countries, from surface pits to underground injection of the fracking fluids in deep well injection mode. So I don't want to stand here today and tell you I know the whole dimension, but stay tuned. I think it's going to be a fractious next few years when it comes to this technology.
Okay. Time for one more? Okay, well, let's thank our speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.